Hi, it's Bumble. Welcome back to my channel. So, this is something new for me. I found a Bond movie that I hadn't actually seen before. Okay, because there's the official canon ones are made by a company called Eon, and there's a bunch of others, including this one, that are not made by the company, and those are considered non-canons. This one's considered non-canon, even though, in terms of the movies anyway, like this one, like not all of the Eon movies are based on like James Bond books, like the original books written by Ian Fleming. This one actually is, but because with the movie stuff, if it's not like an Eon movie, it doesn't count as canon. Even though it also has like Connery's Bond, there's a couple of versions of Casino Royale, because there's the one with Daniel Craig, that one's canon, but there's like two others that have different actors and stuff that are much older, made in like the 60s or something. Those aren't canon either. I don't know if I'll be watching those, but let me start off with, before I get into this, the last Bond movie I'd watched was Diamonds Are Forever, and that kind of made me want to get back into Bond again. And then I saw, at the time I'm like recording this and stuff, that Netflix, because all the Bond movies, thankfully they're usually all on the same streaming service, but they kind of just bounce around streaming services for a while. And at this time that I'm recording, in January 2026, all of the Bond movies are, or the Eon ones, and including this one, are all on Netflix. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna take the chance to rewatch these, because I've seen them all. The Eon ones, I just hadn't seen this one, because I have a bunch of them on DVD, but I don't have all the movies. I had to find them on like other services, streaming services and stuff. And it's nice with Netflix, there's no commercials. So anyway, I just wanted to explain that, as that's my excuse of, okay, I'm gonna watch all the Bond movies again. I want to watch them in order, and I'm gonna do reviews of them too. With my rewatches, I've just watched this one, so I'm not watching this again. And I'd already watched Diamonds Are Forever. I might rewatch that. Don't know if I'll do a review of it, but I might rewatch it just because it like ties in nicely with like Connery's Bond and the stuff with Blofeld, which makes this one confusing, actually. I'll get into that in a minute. Let me just finish my little intro here. But yeah, I'll have a review where I'm going to be like watching a bunch of these, and I'll keep all the other reviews together. You're just going to be getting them a lot later, because I didn't plan to do this, and I had already pre-recorded like months of videos, and I don't want to move where I have them scheduled. So you'll get more Bond just in a while. Right, I mentioned about like Blofeld and stuff. Because he's like the main villain of Bond, to the point where he's considered like an element that, not just like an iconic element of the Bond movies, as he's like the villain of the main leader group, Spectre and stuff, and kind of like Bond's arch nemesis, basically. But it's sort of like an order of like when Bond fights him stuff, mostly in like the movies with Sean Connery, and they kind of bring him back for some of the others. And it's interesting, because with Diamonds Are Forever, that was Connery's like 6th Bond movie, and I thought that was like his last one. It's his last one with Eon anyway. And with that one, it's that he's like fighting Blofeld again, and Blofeld, I think, ends up getting away at the end or whatever. And then in one of the Roger Moore ones, they can't legally use Blofeld anymore, so they have Roger Moore's Bond drop him down a chimney. You'll hear me talk about that later. I don't remember which specific movie it's in. It's in like one of Moore's like first ones or something, like probably second or third. And then with this one, it's like, I'm pretty sure it takes place when it's made in 1983, but Blofeld's there and he's still in charge of Spectre and everything. But I thought he was going to be the main villain for this. He's not. It's actually this other Spectre agent, so someone like lower than Blofeld, and Blofeld's like kind of supervising, implied to be like supervising the whole mission or whatever, and is still the person the main villain of this movie is like taking orders from. And you get to see Blofeld at like the beginning and the end, but he's never really involved in anything with like the actual plot. He never has an encounter with Bond. He's not even mentioned by the other characters or anything. I don't think Bond even knows what he's doing or whatever. So it makes it a little confusing of like, I mean, I know this one's canon, that's what I started off with saying, and that's like true, but it's like because it has Sean Connery playing Bond again, it makes me want to like try to fit in of like, okay, where does this go in the Eon movies timeline? And it doesn't, especially because this, I mean, it has to take place in the 80s too, because the whole theme with it is Bond aging, and that's always something that's kind of interesting because like both Connery and Moore played Bond like, well, like I think they're almost similar ages or something in real life or whatever, but they both played Bond for like a while, like 6 or 7 movies or something, where they're both like, you know, kind of old. I'm assuming like the 50s or something. I mean, that's not like old, but for suave sexual secret agent Bond, that's like kind of a bit too old. And it's interesting because they both have movies, I guess for Connery it's this one where they're like kind of a bit too old for playing Bond, and that just sort of waters everything down a bit, where it's like they can't really do a lot of the physical stuff, though I think Connery in this handles a lot more of the like action and stuff better than like Moore does in whatever his like final Bond movie is. It's the one that takes place in San Francisco. Yeah, A View to a Kill. That's the thing that waters that movie down for me, is like him in it. If they had like a younger person playing Bond at that point, it would have, the rest of that movie's great. But we'll get to that when I end up watching the movie. But yeah, I was glad that the physical stuff wasn't, you know, as affected by Connery's age here as I assumed it would, but then it also just still feels kind of weird because like with both those actors in both those movies, it's like the Bond girl in those looks like 20 years younger than him, and it just like comes off as kind of creepy because it's like supposed to be, you know, romantic. Like Bond is having sex with all these women in this movie, but they're all like, they all look like supermodels and are like way younger than him. It just comes off as like a bit gross, which is why I feel like with Bond actors they shouldn't be like too old playing this character, or at least I'd be fine if it was like Bond girls that are more closer to their age, but you know, the Bond girls, they're supposed to be known as being like super young and sexy, so that's what the movies are trying to go for. But it just, the age gap thing just makes it kind of weird. And this is one of those Bond movies, it's one of like 2 I can think of where Bond is acknowledged, or it's acknowledged by the movie that like Bond's getting older and everyone's like, you're not as good as you could be. Because surprisingly in the Roger Moore one I was talking about, yeah, I think it's A View to a Kill, you know, he's obviously like a lot older and stuff, but like it's not acknowledged by the movie. He's just treated the same and everything. I know in one of the Daniel Craig ones, I think it's Skyfall, he's treated as like, hey, you should be retiring soon, except it's only like his 3rd movie and he doesn't look old, so it just kind of comes out of nowhere, especially because in like Casino Royale he's like a rookie, it's like his first mission, so it's really weird with those movies. But then with this one it kind of makes more sense, and it's an interesting way to go for, where, you know, Connery's coming back to the role after like a decade, and he obviously is older and looks older and stuff, but the thing is, and the characters are all saying like, hey, you're not as sharp as you used to be and stuff, and the movie keeps trying to mention about that and compares it to things and stuff. And it works because, you know, he is a lot older. There's like a significant, like a 10-year gap between this movie and Diamonds Are Forever. What was the other thing I was going to say? I had a point with this. Hold on, let me pause until I remember what it was. Okay, I can't remember what my original point was, but I think it just works of like the characters and the story is like, hey, you're getting older, maybe you should like retire soon or something or whatever. And it fits because of like the state of the double O program in the story anyway, where Bond's superior doesn't really believe in the program anymore and is like trying to get it shut down. There's a part where Bond has like a classic car or something, and one of the characters says something of like, oh, that's like kind of an old car, huh? And Bond says it's like still good, it's still able to keep up, and it's like obviously to make like a comparison to himself, and then he has to use that same line later to try and defend the program and stuff. But they're like trying to shut down the program. The whole MI6 or whatever is like being it's talked about, I think, between like Bond and this movie's Q, that the program isn't working the same way it used to, where everyone's trying to follow stuff by the books and not, how Bond like very clearly like improvises things and just does his own thing, and sometimes doesn't listen to his superiors and stuff. He just does what he believes is right, but yeah, the fact, I think what I was originally trying to say is like the fact that his aging is like kind of tied into other parts of the story, not really into the story of like stopping the villain, but more so kind of like background information about like the double O program and how he's treated by MI6 and stuff, and it just works well. But it's like Bond, especially at the beginning, trying to defend himself of like, and it works with his age and everything of like, oh yeah, I'm aging, but I can still keep up with things and stuff. So it's kind of interesting of having that perspective and having it be where you get to see like, okay, what would a Bond, that's like a couple, like a decade or two older, but still, he's Bond and he's doing Bond stuff and stuff. What would that be like? Especially because I remember, and it's interesting that specifically Connery here, that's in that kind of role, I guess, because I probably have seen him in more movies where he's like a lot older than how he is in Bond and how he is when he's like, playing Bond or younger and stuff. Like in one of the Indiana Jones movies, oh gosh, I'm forgetting what the third one's called, but he's in that where he's like playing Indy's dad. Anyway, and with some of those movies, like there's one I'm gonna watch soon called The Rock, and there's another one I think called Highlander. I don't remember if he's in that. But anyway, there's movies where Connery's like a lot older than this, and he's playing characters that people have said of like, oh, he's playing a character that's kind of similar to Bond. This is the closest he'd be to like as like an old man Bond sort of thing. And I mean, he's not like an old man here, but it's just interesting because he's like still playing, he's still like Bond here, but he's older, so it's like you actually get to see what that's like. And you know what isn't much different from how he is as Bond when he's younger and stuff. He still like acts the same. He's still like smooching women and fighting bad guys and doing all these crazy stunts and whatever. Nothing really changes that much. I mean, the beginning of this movie especially feels kind of slow. I feel like the movie kind of picks up its pace a little as it goes on. I didn't really care for it at first, and it kind of grew on me a bit. I don't think it's bad. There's definitely, at least, like if you're comparing it with some of the Eon movies, there's some Eon movies that I think are a lot worse and stuff. I think the thing with this one is like it's kind of slow. I thought the acting was really good though. But it's kind of like a slow pace overall. Not that it like slogs. There's actually, in my opinion, some of the like super earlier like Bond movies, some of the older Connery ones, I think were like a little too slow for me. But this one is just kind of like just a bit slow, not too much of a bad thing. It doesn't get like where it's boring or I'm waiting like, oh, will the movie end or whatever. I feel like the plot of it has been done before, where it's about Spectre stealing these two bombs or whatever, and they've hid them somewhere, and Bond is trying to get information from the villain on like where are these bombs, you know, that are going to be used, and they're like trying to threaten NATO to like donate money to Spectre, whatever, in exchange for like not having the bombs get blown up or something. That it's like a pretty basic plot, really. I feel like it's been done before in one of the like older Bond movies. I just can't remember which one. I feel like it was one of the Connery ones. I might be thinking of like Thunderball or something. Like it felt kind of familiar, so that wasn't new. It does make me curious though, because this one is based on like an Ian Fleming story, not with that title. I actually was reading about the title because I was curious about it. It was just on Wikipedia though, so I don't know if what I'm saying is true, but it was like something. And I find it interesting that Connery said about like not wanting to return to be Bond again, and was quoted of like, yeah, I'm never going to return the role again. And the movie's title is almost kind of like a spin on that of, you know, he eventually did, and this was his last like Bond movie, especially because it ties with the ending too, where it's funny where like M at the beginning of this movie is like trying to get rid of the 00 program, so Bond doesn't even have like a mission at the beginning or anything, and is trying to get Bond not to do like agent stuff, and then only at the end of the movie, after Bond's defeated the villain and prevented the bombs from being blown up, that and he's like on vacation with the Bond girl somewhere, and M's like, I need you to come back, we need to do this program again, you're the only one that can keep the world safe or whatever, and they have this dialogue that makes it sound like Bond is thinking of actually like retiring, and then he does this thing where he like winks at the camera or whatever at the end of like, haha, nah, he's not gonna retire or something. Though since this is kind of this is like Connery's last Bond movie, and he's like playing an older Bond, I kind of in my head do consider the ending of this of like, yeah, what if he just didn't return to like being an agent or something. But like the fact that he's like an older Bond, the character like James Bond here, not specifically like Connery, and you know, is still wanting to do agent stuff and refusing to just like retire or whatever. I feel like that's like pretty in character. I mean, there's other Bonds later that like do try to just retire, take a break for a while, and for whatever reason it just does not work out. Okay, I want to actually go into my notes now. I've kind of just been rambling about stuff. The music in this, I at least think, I was reading about this movie before when I was trying to find the poster and stuff, and people were saying the music wasn't good. It's definitely different. It's not, you know, because John Barry, he does a lot of the music for the early Bond movies up until I believe The Living Daylights was his last one, and that's in like the mid to late 80s if I remember right. So he does like a lot of the like well-known Bond music, like writing the Bond themes and stuff, like the title themes and stuff, and just the music throughout the movies. His Bond music is like iconic. And actually I think he was still doing the Bond music then, yeah, because it's made in like 83 when this came out, but he doesn't do the music here, it's someone else, but his music, I just wanted to mention him because it's kind of what most people think of like classic Bond music, and it's kind of what I mentally compared a lot of the music in the other Bond movies to, including like the Eon ones. But with this score, I just find it really interesting that it's a lot of jazz, surprisingly. I wouldn't have expected jazz in a Bond movie. I feel kind of mixed with the music in this, actually. The music, if I was just like listening to it like on my computer or whatever, like on Spotify, like if I listened to the soundtrack and I wasn't experiencing it through a Bond movie, I feel like I'd be really happy with it and stuff. And the individual music itself is just, it's all really good, actually. Like there are some instrumental pieces that do sound like, you know, they'd be in like a Bond movie. but it's interesting where it's a lot of music that sounds just kind of, either it's like kind of sexual, it has a lot of saxophones and stuff, or it's just jazz, usually for chase scenes. The jazz at least actually kind of works. The more like sexual music, as I'll call it, it doesn't have like lyrics or anything. It's not sexual in like that way, but just like the way it sounds. Which, I mean, the Eon Bond movies, especially the older ones, do definitely have some songs that are like that too. But I noticed a lot of that, like specifically in this movie, where it sounds really good, but a lot of the time when it's playing, it's in scenes that don't really, it doesn't really fit what's going on on screen. So then it's just this weird, it just feels out of place and almost a little bit distracting. I think the best example of that is the opening to this movie, which the opening, I'm actually a bit upset about it, honestly, and it was the reason I started taking notes. So the thing with the Bond movies, and one of the like iconic elements with it is, and it's something I'll be talking about as along with like the plot and characters and all the other stuff, because it's like such a important part of like the Bond movies and well known, is the opening title sequences, where it'll have like a theme song that usually they have like lyrics and stuff. There's a couple of them that are instrumental. I think probably at least like 2 or 3. And those opening sequences, I mean, usually, okay, it's a lot of like silhouettes of like nude, sexy women and guns, but it also includes visuals, especially in like the newer Bond movies, like the Daniel Craig ones, where it's like a shit ton of visuals that relate to stuff in the plot, usually like a specific item. It even sometimes spoils things, especially with the Daniel Craig ones, it spoils things. It almost reminds me of watching like openings for the JoJo Bizarre Adventure anime, where it's like all this stuff going on screen, but if you're like paying attention, or once you've like seen the thing, then you like experience the story, you realize how much stuff was being spoiled. It's kind of like that. Not so much with like the earlier Bond movies, but definitely with some of the later ones. I think probably starting around like GoldenEye or whatever. Anyway, those title sequences are iconic of like the visuals and stuff, but especially the music. There's so many fucking good Bond themes. I feel like I could make a whole video, but it's gonna be probably just me gushing about the ones I really like. And the song with the, you know, this opening credits and stuff and everything, it just really kind of sets this like vibe. And they're not all like romantic ballads or kind of sexy or anything. There's some of them that are like rock songs and stuff. They kind of go all over the place, and they're usually influenced by like what time period is they're being written. Some of them feel like very dated because of that. I just feel like I had to give that background really quick. So the song for this movie is called Never Say Never Again. You know, a lot of them are like the same as the title. Oh, hold on a second, I'm getting a message on Discord real quick. Okay, I'm good. Someone was just messaging me really quick. Shit, what was I just saying? I was just talking to yeah, the song is called Never Say Never Again. It's really good, actually. It's like, this is a movie from the early 80s, so they don't have the music yet that sounds like really 80s. Or no, some of the ones do. Like A View to the Kill sounds pretty 80s. Anyway, this one the music feels more I was gonna say sexy. It is sexy, but no, I was going to say it feels more like it's from the 70s, and I mean that in a good way. It's like, it reminds me of a little bit of some of the Roger Moore early 80s Bond music. And I mean, this is written in the same time period, so that makes sense, but it's just kind of groovy, really. It's really catchy. It makes me think of like feels more like 70s and 80s to me. Anyway, it's a really good song. I actually like it better than some of the like Eon Bond movie title music. I'm probably going to make a tier list once I'm done with all of these. I think that's just what I've decided. Anyway, song's really good, really catchy. I had it stuck in my head since I finished the movie. But there's no title sequence for this one, and that's disappointing. It's disappointing because it's such a good song, and it absolutely sounds, like it would be in any other Bond movie and stuff. It sounds like a Bond theme song and stuff, of one of those like kind of sexy sounding 70s early 80s like Bond themes, but it's not like one of the ballads. It's just kind of really chill, and I think it's so good that it deserved a title sequence to go along with it. But the other reason I'm disappointed it didn't have one was because instead the song does play at the beginning of the movie, but it's set to a scene of Bond. The opening of the movie is Bond. He's in like a practice thing, training thing, but you don't know that it's a training thing at the moment, and it's him, and he's like breaking into this like base or whatever and taking out these guards to rescue this like woman that's tied up, which sounds pretty simple. That's a thing that happens in some of the Bond movies. Bond has to like sneak in an enemy base or whatever, not like the final layer of the movie, like the villain's final layer or whatever, but just sometimes smaller things. And it just feels really disappointing for like a couple of reasons. The first is that I feel like with the song and the way it sounds and stuff, part of the reason I like that they're part of like the title sequence is it kind of gives those songs kind of just a place within the movie. Like if they're played over action stuff or like anything that's not like like a sex scene or an emotional scene or somewhere where it would fit the music, then it would sound out of place and stuff, and giving it within the title sequence, it kind of lets you kind of get into things a little bit. But it's played over like an action scene, so you're having this like sexy music, but Bond's like killing people and stuff, and it just is a completely different tone between like what you're hearing and what's on screen, and I was so disappointed. And the other thing too is like this opening of Bond like killing these guys or like knocking out these guys and whatever isn't even like fun to watch. It's not very like, there's no like tension or anything. I mean, it turns out to be a training sequence, but you don't know that. So that's disappointing. Like we've had other intros where it's like Bond is on like a mission or something at the beginning or whatever. Like the one for The Living Daylights, I think is like one I can compare to. I don't remember if that one was like Bond in a training sequence or something either. But that one, for example, was like really hype. I don't want to say why because I'll talk about it when I do my review of the movie, but that's like one I can think of as an example. But usually the Bond openings, not the title sequences, but like the opening scene with Bond. I mean, they're not all action sequences, but they usually, some of them are. There's one of them, I think for On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where it's just Bond driving on this cliffside. And it works because he's still like feels like Bond and stuff, and you have this, at least with that one, you have this view of like him driving on this cliff and this like beautiful scenery and stuff. It still fits, and then it continues and turns into an action sequence of him, I'll talk about that one later. My point is there's ones, whether action scenes or not, that just like work, especially to match the tone of the movie, and this one just doesn't feel like hype or anything. It feels like something that would happen in like the middle of the Bond movie or something, but to have it be the opening just felt like the wrong place. It just didn't feel like exciting, and they're supposed to feel exciting. That's my point. I know we spent like a bit too long talking about that part, but that was like actually the biggest thing about the movie personally that like bothered me. But anyway, yeah, the music's good. It's a lot of jazz. I feel like it doesn't, not just that scene, but some of the other ones, the music doesn't match. Like there's a part where Bond is like having sex with somebody, so there's like a sexy song that's playing or whatever, but then the song continues, but then the scene has changed and Bond's doing like stealth stuff, but the song's continuing and it doesn't match anymore. There's just like several moments like that where the music, especially because the music's either very sexual or jazz, where it just doesn't match what's going on screen. Some of the jazz does match, and it's just interesting to watch because that's something different. You don't usually get jazz in a Bond movie. That was kind of a nice surprise, but I feel like the songs themselves were good, but were just really misused. Like some of them could work, you know, for a Bond movie. They just would need to match what's going on screen. So that was just something that was really disappointing. Let me see what else. Okay, I already talked about the Blofeld thing, that he's like in the movie but not the main villain. The actual villain, I'll start talking about characters now. He's this guy, I think his name's Largo. He is the one that's the Spectre person that's in charge of hiding these bombs and stuff. I think one of the bombs is described as being hidden under the feet of the American president, and then the second bomb is taken by the villain to this I don't remember where the location is. It's called like the Tears of Allah. It's a beautiful scenery though, of this sort of like, I don't remember if it was like a temple or something. I think was in like North Africa. I might have to look at that again. But anyway, it's a cool location for like the like climax of the movie and stuff, of where they have to get the bomb and stop the villain. But that's his thing, is he's hiding these bombs. He's like this villain who's supposed to be like kind of a little bit crazy. Not as crazy as some of the other Bond villains or as dramatic. If anything, his demeanor is like actually kind of chill for the most part, except that he's in love with the Bond girl. The Bond girl, her name's Domino. She's played by Kim Basinger, who I've seen in like other stuff. And yeah, Bond ends up falling in love with her, and she falls in love with him, and the villain is also in love with Domino, and that's where he acts kind of like he doesn't really treat her well or anything, and she, you know, isn't in love with him, not just because he's the villain, but like she has a brother. I feel bad for her brother, for Domino's brother. Actually, he's like a very minor character at the beginning, but he's basically set up as like a pawn to steal access to these bombs and stuff. And actually, I described the movie as being slow. A lot of the beginning of the movie is, it just kind of takes forever to get to the stuff with the bombs, where you get to see like, okay, the bombs are replaced and then stolen, and then you know what the mission is, and Bond finally being allowed to like go investigate and whatever. Yeah, because the beginning of this movie, the first like 15 minutes or so is actually kind of boring. Where it's basically, you know, I mentioned the opening is Bond doing this like training mission or whatever that isn't really fun to watch, and oh yeah, and I should explain about that. It's not just if you've never seen any of these movies, because it's important for like going forward and stuff. It's not just like the actors that play Bond. There's 6 of them, by the way, that change for, you know, like they do a couple of movies and then they change and they get someone new. It's kind of like Doctor Who in a sense, where it's like it's a different actor playing the character, but it's like supposed to be the same character. Like a lot of people do think, I mean, I always just thought it was like different people playing, I mean, they're all playing James Bond, but I just assumed it was one person. Even though with the timeline of things, it doesn't make sense, because it keeps changing Bond's birth date on his passport, and it implies that like 3 different versions of Bond have like the same wife. So it gets a little muddled, but I always thought it was like he's the same person, especially because like with some of the movies they make references to like the other ones and as like Bond's previous adventures. But anyway, yeah, the Bond actors change and stuff, and they all play Bond differently, which is, it's kind of like Doctor Who, where it's fun to see them like all have different interpretations of the same character. But the people in Bond's life also change as well. Like Blofeld is probably played by like 4 different actors over time. Bond's superior M is also played by different characters, which is kind of interesting here, where like Usually it starts off where like M's like an older man, but here he's played by someone who's complete opposite, who's like a lot younger. I actually didn't really like this movie's version of M. He's kind of just very loud and very like snippy at Bond and stuff. It kind of looked like he was like younger than Bond too. It was kind of weird. As someone who's supposed to be like the head of MI6, you know. I like, actually my favorite M's the one played by Judi Dench, but we'll talk about her later. And then Moneypenny, who's like M's secretary, but also someone that helps Bond, is also played by like other people. She has like a very short role here. I don't remember who she's. I didn't really recognize like any of the actors in this besides the actors for Bond and Domino. But she seems like she's still like the same character and stuff. Q, Q's in this. Q's interesting. He's played by the same actor. He's like this older man. I don't remember what his name is right now. And he actually stays with the series from the beginning all the way till I think like 1995. He's the person that's in these movies the longest, actually, which is really cool because you get to see him interact with all these like different people that are playing Bond, and they always have a really fun dynamic. And then with the Daniel Craig ones, he's the character is played by someone younger. He's played by the guy that voices Paddington, actually. His character is reinterpreted as like this really techie nerd who's kind of a bit sarcastic and still has the same kind of banter with Bond, but it's like very different. He's cool too. But the Q that's here is kind of like an in-between in a sense, where he's like this sort of nerdy looking middle-aged guy. He's just like some guy, and he still has his sort of banter with Bond. It kind of goes more so on how like the previous Q is, because it takes forever to find. I was like waiting throughout the movie. I'm like, where is the gadget scenes? Oh yeah, and like almost every Bond movie, Bond, you know, it's like he gets assigned his mission from M, and a lot of the time this is like at the beginning of the movie, but with sometimes it'll be like in the middle or whatever. It just depends on like when Bond needs to go investigate something and he's like officially given his mission. It's like M gives him his mission, he gets to talk to Moneypenny. It's almost like a formula, especially in like the early Bond movies, to the point where it's kind of played like beat by beat for a while, and then he goes to Q and gets his gadgets, and Q explains about the gadgets, and those scenes are actually usually kind of funny. Not only are they important because the audience needs to know what the gadgets do and Bond is using them throughout the rest of the movie, but it's like Bond is kind of playful with the gadgets a bit, and Q's trying to just not get Bond to break anything this time. But it takes like a while into the movie to finally get that scene, because the first half an hour or so, Bond is not actually on like an official mission or anything. He's like doing other stuff, which isn't really that fun. But he eventually gets assigned his mission by M, and then he gets the gadget scene with Q. Bond's gadgets are, you know, they're pretty simple with this. The gadgets range from being like, I should just mention about that, and I know this is going to be like a bit longer and it's supposed to be a review of just this movie, but because I'm going to be talking about all the movies at once going forward, I feel like I need to kind of like explain some of this stuff beforehand. It'll just make more sense when I'm talking about it later. The gadgets are kind of crazy, where they range from like jetpacks to lasers and crazy bullshit. I don't remember some of the crazier ones. They get kind of weird. You know what's something that I forgot about? Bond doesn't have, there's an iconic Bond car. It's a specific version of the Aston Martin, and it's like the car that like everyone associates with Bond. It's especially in like the older movies, but it comes back in some of the newer ones. That one's not here. It's not in every Bond movie, but it's always kind of nice to see. But yeah, I forgot it's not in this. But yeah, Bond's gadgets for this one, I think it's just like, I think it's a laser pen, actually. I think that's like his only gadget. In the older movies, Bond kind of has like a couple of like 2 or 3 gadgets or so, and eventually like later on in the series he just stops using gadgets, so you still get scenes with Q, but they're not like gadget scenes, and it's kind of doesn't really feel like Bond without the gadgets. Actually, they're kind of fun because, you know, he's like a spy, he's a secret agent. But yeah, he's a laser pen in this one. The scene where he finally does use it actually is pretty funny. Yeah, that's the other thing. This movie is actually pretty funny. I don't know if it's supposed to be. I mean, there's scenes that are funny in some of the other ones too. Like I remember GoldenEye in particular being kind of funny, or in some of the older Bond movies when things are just kind of silly. I mean, sometimes the humor does come from, again, this is like a series that the movies start in like the early 1960s, so a lot of the effects for things have not aged well, including this movie, which is interesting. They have like green screen CGI stuff in this. A lot of it has not aged well. There's a part where Bond basically plays a video game and they have things on a screen and it looks kind of weird, but not as bad as I thought. So the effects are like kind of but I mean, it is also a movie from 1983, so I feel like I have to be like a little nicer. I don't know. The effects kind of just somewhat get better like as they go along with these movies. But yeah, I want to talk about the laser pen thing, but I'll do that when I get there. But yeah, the movie, I thought it was kind of slow, not as slow as some of the others, not like as boring to me as some of the others, but it is kind of nice though, because sometimes I remember with some of the Connery ones where the scenes will be like so slow, but with this one it didn't really feel that way, which is kind of like, it was slow in comparison to a lot of the other Bond movies, but not to the point where it was moving at like a snail's pace in like individual scenes, so I appreciated that. But I don't think it's one of the bad Bond movies. I think it's actually like okay. And I don't know how to compare it to the other Sean Connery movies. But I don't know if it just feels different because it's like, is it different from the other Ian Fleming's books? Because the books and the movies can sometimes be very different, as I found out when I started reading the books. Or is it because it's not made by Eon and it's made by other people? I don't know how much of that background affects how this movie turned out. But yeah, the vibe of the movie is like, it feels like one of the, I don't know if I could say it feels like one of the Sean Connery Bond movies. I think it does. I think it feels like it's somewhere in like the Connery the Roger Moore movies are like definitely more comedic. They get to the point where they get like completely silly sometimes and really weird. No, this does, I think, fit with like the other Connery movies. It feels like a little, it felt like something was kind of missing. I'll get to that in a second. But what's really wild with watching this is like, you know, all the Connery movies are from the 60s, like early to, I don't know when the last, Diamonds, I think might have been like 70s actually. But for the most part, all those movies are in the 60s, so they visually look like they're from the 60s. And they also feel very dated to the 60s as well. But like the visuals also, you know, you can tell, it's a movie from the 60s. But with watching this one is weird because it feels like it's the same tone as those movies. Like, oh yeah, it's just like another Connery adventure for the most part. But it's made in the 80s, so it looks like it's from the 80s, not like the costumes or anything. What I actually do kind of like with this movie is it doesn't look like it's dated to when it's made, which a lot of the Bond movies are like that, especially the ones from the 60s feel very 60s with like the fashion and stuff, which isn't a bad thing. It makes it kind of interesting to go through the series where you get to see the progression of like fashion and other stuff as you're like watching these in orders. It's actually kind of fun. I remember I was commenting on that a lot with my mom when we were originally watching the series together, like 7 years ago or something. But yeah, it has the camera quality and stuff of the 80s. which is kind of, it's basically like, kind of in that sense, you know, it looks the same as like the other early 80s Bond movies that were being made at the same time. I think Octopussy came out like the same year as this one or something. So it's at that same it's basically like, what if you had the visual quality of like those Roger Moore early 80s movies, but it's with Connery instead, and it's the tone of those older Bond movies, which makes this one kind of interesting and unique. You kind of view it from a different lens in that sense. But what's interesting with this one is, I don't know if this one was like cleaned up or something, because like some of the other Bond movies I have like are on DVD. This one is like, I don't know if it's in like HD, or is it the TV I'm watching, or the fact that it's like on Netflix or whatever, but it looks like crystal clean a lot of the time, and not even like with some of the movies from the 80s like look like that. I was watching this and I'm thinking, why does this visually look better than like the Roger Moore Bond movies that are being made at the same time? From what I remember, it was kind of crazy actually, of just like how clear everything was. I don't know how to explain it. I guess you would see if you watched it yourself, or if it's in like HD or whatever. It was kind of cool. There's some scenes, I think what part of makes this movie slow is there's scenes that sometimes just don't have anything to do with the plot. They don't go on for like 5 minutes or drag on or anything, but it's like, why is it here? I mean, I now that I think about it, I kind of understand, for like it pops up for things later, but it's like weird in the moment. There's a lot of scenes in this movie that just feel very awkward. Like there's this one, and at the time I didn't understand. I'm like, it's the villain watching the Bond girl, she's dancing, and he's like watching her through a two-way mirror. And I was like, this doesn't have anything to do with the plot, but then you get to see Bond use the two-way mirror later to like spy on the villain. So in that sense, it makes sense, but there's like a lot of stuff like that where like in the moment it's like, what does this even mean or whatever. There's actually, no, never mind. Oh yeah, the guy that plays Mr. Bean, he's in this. He plays this nervous guy that like works for MI6 that kind of helps Bond. He doesn't have a big role. He does give Bond information, so he's like technically important in the plot. He's not playing a character that's like similar to Mr. Bean, but he is playing like a comic relief character, not where it gets too silly, because there are some Bond characters that, this is going to sound really weird until I get to some of those movies, specifically in like the Roger Moore movies, that are like pretty silly and are very much there as like comic relief. Like they're supposed to be funny. The character that the Mr. Bean guy plays actually isn't that bad, where like he's supposed to be kind of funny in that he's like kind of like a little clumsy, or he interrupts Bond at wrong moments, but he doesn't come off as annoying. He doesn't really do anything that like stops the plot, so it's the kind of comic relief I'm like okay with. It does feel kind of weird now that I think about it, to talk about like Bond movies and comic relief in the same sentence, but like they're gonna get freaking crazy in that department once we get to the movies in like the 70s and 80s. There's a couple of times where like Bond has sex with people, and normally that does feel kind of weird for me to talk about like sex in movies or whatever, but these are the Bond movies where they are like part of the movies and stuff, so I kind of like have to talk about them. Usually and with those like sex scenes, there's Bond you know, like fucks a lot of women in these movies. It's kind of like a thing with his character. They're usually like kind of sexy. Like they're not long, you don't see any nudity. It's literally just like sometimes Bond is like making out with someone on a bed or whatever, and then it'll cut to them like in the bed and they're like talking, or they're on to the next scene. You don't actually like really see anything or whatever, but you know, usually those are like kind of sexy. They're supposed to be and stuff, and they'll have like nice music in the background or whatever, but the scenes for that in this movie, just they're not sexy. You know what the two like sexiest things of the movie were. It wasn't even the sex scenes, it was the Bond girl. I'm not trying to sound like sexist saying that or anything. The Bond girl and the title theme, and like that was it. It just this anytime where, not even where it was like sex, but like Bond is like making out with someone in this movie, it just actually felt kind of awkward to watch, and not just because like it's an older version of the character and the actor's older, and you know, the whole icky thing of like he's making out with women younger than him, but just the way the movie it just is in the movie, it just comes off as like awkward to watch. It's just like the way it's there. I don't really like the first time it happens, it's with and it does end up actually being kind of plot important, surprisingly. It's with the main like henchwoman of the villain, who's like trying to kill Bond throughout the whole movie, because there's like a couple of those in the movie. Not a couple, but like there's usually, they're like this secondary antagonist in a way of not like the main villain, but, and they work for the main villain, but they're like the assassin character that's trying to kill Bond throughout the whole thing. They're usually pretty memorable. Some of them, like Jaws, even appear in like multiple movies and stuff. But the one in this one, Bond like has sex with her in a boat. It's really awkward because it's in a room that has like fishing equipment, and it cuts between them in different positions, like making out or whatever, and then it cuts to like random footage of fish, and then it goes back to them doing stuff, and it doesn't come off as like sexy because they're in a boat in like a storage room, but like why is it just quickly cutting to fish swimming? I don't know. I think for me, what I wanted to say earlier, this one just kind of lacks pizzazz. It looks and feels like a Bond movie, which is great. I was worried about that when I found out it wasn't made by Eon. And it does have stuff, you know, like some of the well-known Bond stuff, like, oh, Bond is in a tuxedo, Bond has a vodka martini, Bond is, you know, shooting guns and making out with women and whatever. I think just because it's missing just the stuff from Eon or things that are more well known in those movies, it's missing like the title sequence, you know, with the song, the way it's usually done. It's, oh yeah, I can't believe I forgot this. It's missing the gun barrel. All the other ones have the gun barrel thing, you know, where a person, you know, the gun, I'll just explain the gun barrel sequence if you've like never seen it. It's where someone is aiming at Bond, and you see that perspective of looking through the gun barrel where they're going to shoot Bond, and then whoever's playing Bond is there and turns towards the barrel and shoots back, and then there's blood that goes down, and it has like the Bond theme song and stuff. It's a very iconic thing, but yeah, it's not in this one. I didn't even think about that. It's missing a lot of those elements, but it's missing this sort of like pizzazz. I don't know how to explain it exactly. It was just something I was thinking about throughout the movie. But there are some cool stuff in this, and there's parts that are funny. The underwater scenes were actually like really well done. I was surprised with that. It was kind of nice because, okay, Connery's third Bond movie, it's called Thunderball, so you'll hear me talk about it relatively like fast in the order when I eventually talk about the Bond movies. That one is what I refer to as the underwater Bond movie because most of it takes place underwater. It has to do with the plot and stuff. It actually has a similar plot to this movie, but most of it's underwater. But because it's a movie from like the early 60s, the underwater shots and stuff don't really look good. There's later Bond movies where they also have to go underwater, not for like the entire movie or anything. Like I think there's a Roger Moore one that's set in Greece that they go underwater quite a bit, and those look fine and whatever. There's plenty of water scenes in these movies, but like Thunderball is like the one that's like mostly underwater and it looks bad.
I think those sequences look bad, honestly. So it's kind of nice with this one where it's like it's Connery's Bond and he's underwater again, but everything actually looks really good. It's like crystal clear with what you could see. Could be the quality of the movie here on Netflix, I don't know. But it kind of made up for Thunderball for that for me, so that was really nice. There's a part where Bond is being followed and attacked by a shark. That was cool. I think the main villain gets killed underwater, and I didn't even freaking notice. It's when Bond finally finds the second bomb, because remember, he's trying to find these 2 bombs the whole movie, and he shoots someone and the person dies, and then it cuts to him with the Bond girl and it's like Bond saved the world. I didn't even know if that was supposed to be the main villain, because if it is, Bond kills him really freaking easy to the point where it's disappointing. And if it's not the main villain, then I don't remember Bond killing him before that. And normally that's like a bit more of a dramatic thing, so that was just disappointing. What else? There's a part where the main henchwoman, her outfits are interesting to me too. She wears a lot of very fashionable what was I gonna say, movies, outfits throughout the movie. I really liked her costumes, I think, better than everyone else's, especially because she wears a lot of red too. It just looks really good on her. But there's this part where she wears what my parents and I referred to as plastic pirate clothes, where it looks like a pirate outfit of like the white shirt and the type of pants she was wearing and stuff, but it looks like it's all made out of plastic. It looked goofy. But there's a part where she's wearing that outfit, and she holds Bond at gunpoint, and rather than just shooting him, which, I mean, to be fair, that's a thing in a lot of these movies where the villains are planning to kill Bond and they don't do it immediately, so then Bond's able to like escape really fast. But rather than shooting him, she makes him write on a paper. I'm not even kidding about this. They're talking about like when they had sex on the boat. She's the person, he had sex with on the boat. That's why I said that was actually plot important. She asks him like, oh, was it the best sex you've ever had? And he's like, no, there was this girl in Philadelphia, and he makes this thing like trying to calm her down, and he's obviously not serious about it, like, oh, I'll write in my memoirs that you were number one. And she literally tells him like, write it right now. Like, she gives him paper and he has to literally write it like word for word, that like this was the person I had the best like sex with or whatever. It comes off as awkward as you'd expect, but then Bond shoots her with the laser pen that he's using to write, and it's really funny. I laughed so hard, just the explosion, because he shoots the laser, there's like blood that comes out of her, she starts laughing or whatever, and then there's another close-up of the blood, and she literally just freaking explodes just out of nowhere, and just the way it happens was just really funny to me. What else? There's a scene where Bond goes to a charity ball. I think that's the part of the movie, because there's like 3 main locations in this. Oh, I forgot to talk about the intro, but I'll get to that at the end. Actually, it's kind of boring. I'll talk about that right now. Actually, the first, because I mentioned, there's like the first 15-20 minutes of the movie is boring. So what happens there, Bumble? M sends Bond Bond makes a mistake in the training mission that's not very characteristic of him, and Bond's like, M's like, yeah, you're not as sharp as you used to be. I'm gonna send you to this wellness hospital to like eat better and whatever. You're not allowed to have red meat and martinis, and Bond's sad about that. Bond ends up sneaking caviar in a suitcase there though, so it's all good. But yeah, there is plot important things that happen there where we see the main henchwoman and her planning the stuff that eventually gets to like the stealing of the bombs. But then Bond doesn't really know what's going on though, and you think like, okay, he's in this like wellness center, whatever, and he's gonna like kind of learn about the plot that way and investigate things. He learns like a couple things, but he ends up having this really long fight with this person that's like a lot stronger than him. It goes on for like way too long. There's even like old people in the background just like chilling. That whole part of the movie, the wellness center, goes on for like way too long and is kind of boring. Anyway, there's a charity ball that happens in the movie. I like the location there because they go from like the beginning of the movie kind of taking place in like Jamaica for a while, which Jamaica is a location that's actually in a lot of Bond movies. There's a reason for that, but I'll probably explain that later when I talk about Dr. No. And then they go to France, and that's the part that has the charity ball where the villain has his like super fancy house or whatever, and Bond sneaks into the charity ball. When he sneaks in there, it's actually kind of funny because there's this one part he gives a guard his cigarette case, but he doesn't tell the guard. He like gets super serious and gets in the guy's face and is like, hey, this is a bomb. If you move or let go of the bomb, it's going to explode. And he just puts the guy in like a storage case, and the guy's of course like terrified as hell. So he doesn't move and he doesn't leave, and that's how Bond gets in the charity ball. And then when the charity ball is over, when Bond's leaving, you know, you'd expect it to just go the next scene, but there's a scene where Bond actually goes back to that storage closet, and he's like, oh hey, thanks, and he takes it, and the guy doesn't explode, and then you see Bond he's out of that closet and he takes a cigarette out, and it's a cigarette case. Bond literally just tricked someone into thinking they were holding a bomb just from being like serious or whatever. That part was actually kind of funny. I was surprised that they let the joke like continue. But the lighting in the movie, but especially in that charity ball, but I guess specifically in the charity ball, it's really nice. It's like very soft. There's a part where Domino and Bond end up having to do this like waltz or whatever, where he's giving her like secret plot important information and stuff. I do really like how they're able to talk throughout the movie, where it's like the Bond girl lives with the villain and is like trying to betray him, and Bond is giving her information and she's like helping him behind the scenes. I think that happens in like a couple of the movies. Usually not that the Bond girl is with the villain the whole time. Usually it's like she gets kidnapped and Bond has to help her, or he's trying to convince someone to like join the good guys or whatever. But yeah, they end up having a waltz scene, and that actually, just the way it was like shot and the lighting and stuff was really good. The lighting was like very soft and gentle. I just wanted to mention about that really quick. The villain's fancy house where he has the party is kind of weird to me. Why is there like a billion arcade cabinets there at this charity ball? They're not in like a separate room. The guests are like playing them. There's enough to fill an arcade in there. They even got Centipede in there. That was just crazy to me because that felt really random. I mean, yeah, that is like absolutely something a rich person would do about buying a bunch of arcade games. But the fact that they're all in the room where they're having the party, not the room where Bond and Domino were dancing, but it's like a different room. That was just like so out of like left field. I was like, huh? I'm like, there's video games in a Bond movie? Especially because they get to play them, not the arcade machine, sadly. But okay, it was kind of weird because I saw some people playing these games that would be at like a casino. I don't mean like the arcade games, but like gambling stuff. Not slot machines either. It's like the kind of stuff Bond usually plays. And in most Bond movies, there's like usually a sequence of like Bond is playing like Blackgammon or whatever, or was it, or no, Backgammon. It's called Backgammon, not Blackgammon. Yeah, Backgammon, I think it's called, or poker, that kind of stuff. And it's usually like Bond's in a casino, he's wearing a fancy outfit, sometimes he's playing against the main villain or a hench person, and it's usually like when he meets the like femme fatale character or the Bond girl that way or something. It's set up like a very specific way, those scenes. I mean, even Casino Royale is an entire movie that's just that, actually, which feels kind of funny. But I saw one of those like tables or whatever, and I thought, okay, here comes the gambling scene, and then Bond doesn't use it, and then instead they pass by all the arcade machines, and I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. And I half expected Bond and the villain to like just start playing on one of those. That would have been so fucking funny. But instead, the villain's like, hey, I have my own game I want you to play. And it's like a homemade video game. It's kind of weird. They even have like joysticks and everything. They're playing a game that sounds like it's kind of like Battleship, but they have like a big screen and they have to shoot on things, and it looks like it's like an 80s video game type thing. It's just really weird and like out of place to see that in a Bond game, and they're playing it the same way you would with like a video game, as if they were playing one of those arcade cabinets. So that's like just kind of really funny to me that Bond is like technically playing a video game in this, and it's like a serious scene too, where it's against the main villain. Oh, and the villain has the thing programmed where it's like if you start to lose, the Joy-Cons give you some kind of, not Joy-Cons, I'm sorry, that's the thing on Switch. They're not playing the Nintendo Switch in 1983 in a Bond movie. No, the joysticks. They shock you and cause you physical pain. So you feel physical pain the worse you do in the game. So there's like stakes there and whatever. And it's a very serious scene, but I'm like, this just does not feel like something in a Bond movie. Like the setup of them playing the game together, it's set up the same way as almost like one of the gambling scenes against the villain or something like that. But just the machine they're playing on just does not feel like it would be in another like Bond movie or whatever. Oh yeah, then there's a car chase where Bond is on this like motorcycle thing that gets shown like earlier in the movie, or like mentioned earlier in the movie. I forgot about it. That was actually pretty cool. There's a part where Bond is forced into a tunnel and the villains are like surrounding him and they're trying to trap him in like a really big truck. And Bond turns around on the motorcycle and the door is closing, and he waits for it to close enough, and then he goes out of the truck and he uses it as a ramp. That was actually really cool. There's another part where Bond and the Bond girl and a horse, they're on a horse, I should say. The horse is not a main character. That like came out weird originally, and they're riding this horse, and Bond forces the horse off of the top of a building, like a tall building, and they have to fall, and they end up falling in water. You do get to see the horse is okay. The horse ends up swimming away. I was actually concerned about the horse because, oh my gosh, they have such a long fall where they use like a green screen thing though. But still, it's kind of crazy in terms of like what the characters are actually doing, where they're just on this horse and you just see them fall straight down. They end up landing in water, but like, holy shit, if they didn't land in water, I think those horses' legs would have just been like completely shattered or some shit. That was crazy. But there's some stuff like that which is pretty cool. Felix Leiter, he's in this movie too. He's another important Bond character, because I'm kind of like explaining these as they go because they pop up later. He's an American CIA agent, where he kind of will pop up in like a couple scenes in some of the movies, where he'll like help Bond. Usually it's like if Bond has to get away from a situation or something, Felix is there and he like helps Bond like escape onto a boat or whatever. Sometimes he gives Bond information about stuff. And this one is kind of nice, where he tries to tag along with Bond a little bit, where they're like swimming and stuff. The ending's fine, I think, of like M trying to ask Bond back and Bond doesn't really want to, but then they make the never say never again joke, and the fact that the movie just ends with like Bond literally winking at the camera just killed any interest I had in that ending. I mean, to be fair, and I should explain it, usually the Bond endings are kind of goofy and comedic. Actually, it's usually like Bond has finished his mission and he's somewhere, either in like a boat or freaking outer space. Yeah, there's a Bond movie that's in space. I get to talk about that later. It's going to be interesting. That's one of the more wacky ones, actually. Or just somewhere with the Bond girl and they're like making out or whatever, and M is trying to find Bond, usually talking to Bond, or Q is talking to Bond on like a radio of like, hey Bond, cool, you saved the world, where the hell are you so we can like find you? And Bond's like, yeah, I'm still alive, it's all good, and he usually turns off the radio, and there's usually some kind of stupid pun, sexual innuendo thing, and then Bond gets, sometimes it's like Bond is waiting to get rescued, and he'll be like, basically like, okay, we got time to like do sex until we get rescued or whatever. So it's not as it's basically like one of those. It's not as cheesy as some of the other ones or as funny, but it's just the fact that he like literally winks at the camera, just and they really gotta dive into that never say never again thing. Just it's like don't like it. It's the wink that ruins it. There's others that are just as cheesy or whatever, but and usually Bond says something silly, but the wink just like ruined it for me. Okay, yeah, that's it. That felt like a little too long. That was like an hour. There will probably be there's Bond movies that are better. There's Bond movies that I like way more that I'll probably talk for just as long or longer. I mean, most of this was like less of me talking about the movie and more me talking, but it was important though, because from this point onward, which you're gonna get these reviews later, I'll be talking about all the Bond movies at once, and I'm gonna be talking about like some of these recurring characters and recurring elements and things, so I felt it was important. I should have done this with Diamonds Are Forever, but I didn't think about it. I needed to explain of like who these recurring characters are, of like the people at MI6 and Felix Leiter, and how they're played by like different actors and stuff, and who these characters are, what do they do, what are some of the recurring Bond elements, talking about Blofeld and stuff, because these are things that pop up again and again, where if you're like actually watching all of these and whatever, especially if you're watching a lot of these like back to back, you're expected to kind of know what all these things are and stuff, and I just wanted to kind of take the time to explain those in case if you're watching these reviews and you haven't seen like any of the Bond movies, it's kind of like important to know. But yeah, that's Never Say Never Again. So yeah, I liked it as I was going through it. There's, yeah, like I said, better Bond movies in my opinion. These are all just my opinion on how I feel on these and stuff. But I liked it better than some of the bad Eon one. I'll call some of them bad. In my opinion, as I'm talking and kind of mentally, I'm not going to make a tier list on all of these, but like kind of mentally out loud rating these as I go through. Will probably keep changing because I'm kind of comparing these to ones I've like seen like 7 years ago. I might not clearly remember. My opinion on movies between the first time and this time I watch it may completely change, and the way I compare things, and I might forget things and whatever. It's all kind of up in the air as I'm making these and watching these, but this one I could say it's just okay. Some stuff of it I actually really liked, and I just think it's just more unique. I'm glad it exists, of like Bond, of like an actor coming back to the role and playing Bond, but the character's older and the actor's older. It's basically like, what if you got like an older Bond and it's like acknowledged by the story as well and everything, and it just fit. I mean, I wish the movie kind of went like a bit more into that. It's really only at the beginning, because then from there it's just like a standard Bond adventure where he's just doing like Bond stuff and whatever. But yeah, it was interesting with that. It was interesting to have like a older, like 60s kind of style Bond, like Connery Bond adventure, but having it where it visually looks like it's from the 80s in terms of the camera work and everything. Like, it doesn't look like it's from the 60s, and just having it more like it's one of those, but it's like visually updated and stuff. And that was actually really cool, and I'm not going to have that again. But it was also nice watching this where I'd watched like the Eon Bond movies, so I haven't had a new Bond movie since like No Time to Die, but I haven't had like an older Bond movie that's new for me since I was originally watching these, so that was kind of fun. And it was especially nice to watch this because like I'd watched Diamonds Are Forever, which was the other like final Bond Connery movie, and then with this one, and then I'm gonna start the beginning of the series, and I'm gonna start with Dr. No. So it's gonna be weird with this one, going from like Connery and Bond are like old, and then going to the beginning where it's like it's the first one, he's younger. And it's also going to be interesting comparing that with this, because this one is missing a lot of the like well-known Bond stuff, And then with Dr. No is kind of just simpler overall compared to a lot of the other Bond movies. I can see why it's like the first one they like chose to adapt, though I haven't read the book for it. But you know, it's the first Eon Bond movie, I should say, where, you know, a lot of those iconic Bond elements aren't there either because they don't exist yet. So gonna be interesting to like kind of pivot between those two. All right, or you know, to go from one to the other. I hope I'm like saying that right. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it. Sorry this was a bit long. I just needed to like explain some stuff. But like once we go forward with the other Bond movie videos and stuff, you know, I'm not gonna have to explain about the characters and things anymore. I can just focus on the movie. But I'll like be comparing these to each other as I go along. I'm looking forward to it. I haven't seen these in probably like 6 or 7 years or something, probably longer. It's probably like 8 years or something. And I'm going to be watching these like literally back to back, not like marathoned all day, every day, but maybe like 1 or 2 a day or something for like the next 2 weeks or whatever. I'm going to be watching other movies as well, but this is going to be like my main focus. But yeah, sorry, you're going to get those later because of how I pre-scheduled a lot of the videos and stuff. But once it gets there, it'll be just like a solid month. I don't know which month of 2027. I know it'll at least be after like March or something, but it'll just be like one solid month of Bond movies you're gonna get. So that'll be cool. See you then.